A homeless veteran, dragged into court for disturbing the peace. A judge, hardened by years on the bench. But when she hears his name, the entire room rises. What could one forgotten soldier mean to a courtroom full of strangers? The courtroom buzzed with restless energy. It was one of those overbooked municipal dockets where petty crimes piled high and defendants shuffled through like cattle. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly hue over the tired faces of those waiting their turn. Mothers with crying toddlers, men with bloodshot eyes, and teenagers nervously clutching citations sat shoulder to shoulder. No one paid much attention when the bailiff called the next case. Case number 4471. The State versus Horace Grant. Charges: trespassing, disturbing the peace, public nuisance. At the sound of the name, Judge Sophia Woodson, seated high at the bench, felt a sudden, inexplicable chill crawl up her spine. She straightened in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she instinctively looked up from the docket. The man who stood slowly from the defendant's bench didn't look like much. An older figure, maybe late 60s or early 70s, though the lines on his face made him appear older. His beard was gray and uneven, his clothes a patchwork of threadbare fabrics layered against the cold. He clutched a worn military jacket, the faded insignia barely visible beneath years of grime and wear. No one else seemed to care. A few people snickered, someone in the back whispered, "Another drunk vet," and a young man beside him scooted away in exaggerated disgust. Horace kept his eyes low, shoulders stooped, every motion a quiet apology for taking up space. Sophia's pulse quickened. Why did that name sound familiar? She reached for the thin file at her side, flipping it open. The standard sheet list of infractions, court history, a few minor offenses, then a note in faded type: military service, U.S. Marine Corps, Iraq War. Her hand hesitated. A faint memory tugged at her, something buried deep beneath years of courtroom cases and late nights in law school libraries. The prosecutor, a smug-looking assistant DA barely out of law school, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the defendant has been repeatedly cited for loitering near commercial property, refusing to vacate, and causing disturbances. The state recommends time served and mandatory shelter placement." The words blurred in Sophia's ears. And then, the doors at the rear of the courtroom swung open. Heads turned. A man in an immaculate, tailored suit strode down the aisle with purposeful steps. Broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with sharp features and hair combed so perfectly it looked sculpted. The courthouse regulars recognized him immediately. Brandon Swan, one of the city's most notorious and expensive defense attorneys. The kind of lawyer who usually reserved his talents for politicians' sons and corporate executives in trouble. He reached the defense table and stopped beside Horace, who barely glanced up. "Your Honor, Brandon Swan for the defense." His voice was smooth as glass, yet carried enough weight to hush the murmurs around them. "I'm entering an appearance on behalf of Mr. Grant." The prosecutor blinked. "On behalf of who?" "Horace Grant," Brandon repeated, without looking away from Sophia. For a second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Even the court reporter looked up from her stenograph. Sophia's brow furrowed. "Mr. Swan, is this a joke?" Brandon smiled faintly. "No, Your Honor. Mr. Grant is my client." The prosecutor scoffed. "On what grounds? He doesn't have any money." "I didn't say he hired me. I said I represent him," Brandon replied, his voice tightening just enough to warn the younger man to back off. Sophia took a deep breath. The unease in her chest gnawed at her, the ghost of something unspoken pulling at the corners of her mind. She glanced down again at the file and noticed a single, creased piece of paper tucked inside, a yellowed printout of a commendation. Sergeant Horace Grant, awarded Bronze Star for valor in Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah. Her heart lurched. Fallujah. She looked up sharply at the man before her, this broken figure no one else seemed to see. "Mr. Grant," she said quietly, her voice softer than she'd meant it to be. "Is this true? Were you in Fallujah?" Horace's eyes lifted, pale blue, clouded by age but steady. For a second, The entire courtroom faded away. He nodded once, a small, dignified motion. "Yes, ma'am. A long time ago." Sophia's throat tightened, her hands trembling imperceptibly where they rested on the bench. Brandon stepped closer. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess. There's additional information pertinent to this case I'd like the court to review before proceeding." The prosecutor started to protest, but Sophia cut him off. "Granted." She cleared her throat, composing herself. 10-minute recess. Mr. Swan, my chambers. Now. The bailiff banged his gavel, and as the crowd stirred and shuffled, Brandon turned to Horace, leaning in. "Don't worry, Sergeant. You're not alone anymore." And Horace Grant felt he was not alone. The courtroom reconvened 10 minutes later, but the energy in the room had shifted. The laughter was gone. The low hum of conversation now carried a nervous edge, and all eyes drifted toward the disheveled man at the defense table. Horace Grant sat with his hands folded, gaze steady, while Brandon Swan stood beside him like a sentinel. Judge Sophia Woodson returned to the bench, her face composed, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed a storm brewing beneath. She tapped her gavel once. "Court is now back in session. Mr. Swan, you may proceed." Brandon buttoned his suit jacket, stepping forward with the poise of a man used to commanding attention. "Your Honor, before addressing the charges, the defense moves to challenge the validity of this case in its entirety, not merely on legal grounds, but on moral grounds," he began, his voice sharp, clear. The prosecutor, a young man named Colin Dorsey, stiffened. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's personal opinions. I'm speaking to the systemic neglect of men like my client." Brandon cut in, his voice rising just enough to make heads swivel. "Veterans discarded by the very country they served, abandoned to the streets, and processed through this courthouse like broken machines in an assembly line. This case isn't about trespassing. It's about how easily we forget." Sophia felt her pulse in her ears. She opened her mouth to respond, but Brandon was already moving, approaching the bench with a folded file in his hand. "Permission to approach," he said quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. Brandon handed over the file, thinner than most, but marked with a red seal indicating restricted military access. "Your Honor," Brandon murmured so only she could hear, "I believe this might shed some light on why this man ended up here today." Sophia's brow furrowed as she broke the seal. Inside were a handful of weather documents, photographs, and one crisp, typed report. Her eyes skimmed over it. Names, units, dates. Then one line made her stomach drop. Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah, Iraq. Notable action. Sergeant Horace Grant credited with saving the life of Corporal Harry Woodson during an insurgent ambush, November 13, 2004. Sophia's hand clutched the edge of the bench. The room blurred around her. Harry. The name echoed like a gunshot in her head. Her younger brother. The kid with a crooked grin and a fondness for old baseball cards. The boy who enlisted at 19, who never spoke about what he saw overseas, but returned quieter, older in ways she never understood. And then a memory she'd buried surfaced. A letter sent years ago from a military hospital in Germany. She could still hear his voice as she read it. "Soph, I should have died out there. It was a Marine guy named Grant. Big, gruff bastard. Pulled me out of a burning Humvee under sniper fire. Never even got to thank him." Sophia's throat tightened. The paper in her hand trembled. "I need a moment," she managed, rising from the bench before anyone could question her. "Court will stand in recess for 10 minutes. She didn't wait for the gavel. Sophia stepped into her chambers, closing the door behind her. The quiet hit like a wave. Her reflection in the mirror above the sideboard startled her. Face pale, eyes wide, 1,000 unspoken emotions breaking the mask of authority. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The years hadn't dulled the ache of losing Harry. He wasn't dead, but the man who came back wasn't the boy she'd known. And she'd spent so long trying not to think about that war, that night, that name. But here it was, Horace Grant, the man no one in that room had seen. Until now. A knock sounded at the door. Sophia quickly wiped at her face. "Come in." It was Brandon. He stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral. "I'm sorry to spring that on you, Judge," he said softly. "But you deserve to know." Sophia nodded, unable to find words. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere continued to crackle with tension. Colin Dorsey fidgeted with his notes, unprepared for what came next. Brandon turned to the small audience, a collection of tired defendants, indifferent spectators, and a few local reporters. He held up a printout. "For those curious," he announced, loud enough for the gallery, "this man you're so quick to dismiss as a vagrant and nuisance earned a Bronze Star for valor, pulled 4 men out of a kill zone under sniper fire. And the city he defended hasn't shown him a fraction of the respect it owes." A woman in the back gasped. A man lowered his phone, his earlier smirk gone. Brandon glanced at Horace, then back at the prosecutor. "You didn't even bother to check his record, did you?" he said quietly. Colin swallowed hard, his face flushing. "It wasn't in the system. I didn't." "No, you didn't." Brandon cut him off. "And you're not the first." In that moment, something shifted. The indifference in the room cracked, replaced by a subtle, growing shame. People saw him differently now. The weathered jacket, the haunted eyes, the weight of things unsaid. Sophia returned minutes later, face composed but gaze sharper, heavier. "Mr. Swan," she said, her voice low and steady, "I'd like to review the rest of that file before proceeding." Brandon nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." She turned to the bailiff. "Clear the docket for the next hour. This case stays here." Horace Grant sat a little taller, his shoulders squared beneath that faded jacket. The court wasn't done with him yet. The steady hum of whispered voices spread through the courtroom like ripples across still water. Word traveled fast in places like this, among the down-and-outs, the overlooked, the veterans clinging to the edges of society. Men and women whose uniforms had long been traded for threadbare coats and weathered faces. A pair of older men sitting near the back exchanged a glance. One wore a faded cap with a Marine Corps emblem barely visible beneath years of sun and dust. The other leaned heavily on a cane, his weather-beaten hands gripping the handle like a lifeline. "That him?" the man with the cap murmured. The one with the cane squinted toward the defense table. "God Almighty, that's Horace Grizzly Grant." Another voice from across the room. "You sure? I'd know that mountain of a bastard anywhere." Slowly, like an unspoken agreement, a handful of old soldiers, sailors, and Marines began to rise from their seats. One by one, they moved toward the front of the gallery, their movements stiff with age and injury but deliberate, purposeful. Brandon Swan noticed first. He turned as the men approached, a quiet nod of gratitude passing between them. Judge Sophia Woodson, still reviewing the file at the bench, sensed the shift in the room's weight. She looked up to see 6, 7, now 9, older veterans standing at attention behind Horace Grant, their expressions grim but resolute. "Your Honor," one of them spoke up, his voice gravelly but firm. "Permission to address the court." Sophia hesitated. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't procedure. But something inside her, a pull stronger than the robe on her shoulders, urged her to break from form. "State your name for the record," she said quietly. "Staff Sergeant Willard Hayes, United States Marine Corps, retired." Sophia gave a single nod. "I served with Sergeant Grant in Fallujah," Hayes began, stepping forward, his frame still carrying the ghost of battlefield authority. "November 2004. Operation Phantom Fury. I watched this man drag 3 of my boys out of a burning building, bullets snapping the air like hornets. I saw him take a round in the shoulder and keep moving. Saved my life too." Another man stepped up beside him. Chief Petty Officer Sam Walker, Navy Corpsman. "Sergeant Grant pulled a sniper off my back with his bare hands in Ramadi. No exaggeration, ma'am. We called him Grizzly for a reason." One by one they spoke. Tales of impossible rescues under fire, of nights spent in cold, hostile deserts, of men who should have died but didn't because of the broad-shouldered man in the tattered coat sitting silently at the defense table. Stories so visceral the courtroom seemed to dissolve around them, replaced by smoke, sand, and the acrid scent of cordite. Sophia's throat tightened with each account, the cold weight of her brother's letter now pressing heavier against her heart. She stood. The gavel, this time, was unnecessary. The room fell silent on its own. "I need to speak," Sophia said, her voice low, trembling at first, but rising with conviction. "Not as a judge, not even as an officer of this court, but as a sister." She met Horace's eyes, dark, steady, familiar in a way she couldn't fully explain. "My brother, Corporal Harry Woodson, wrote to me once, from a hospital bed in Germany. He told me about a man who pulled him from a burning Humvee under sniper fire. A man he never had the chance to thank. For years I wondered about that soldier. I tried to forget the war took pieces of him I'd never get back. But I never forgot the name he wrote." Her voice cracked. "Horace Grant." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Sophia swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "I don't care what the docket says, or what technicalities brought you here today, Sergeant Grant. This court, this city, this country owes you more than it can repay. And my family owes you a life debt." The room was silent. Even the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Sophia drew a breath, steadying herself. "I hereby order that all charges against Sergeant Horace Grant be dropped, with prejudice. Furthermore, I demand an immediate, full review of his military benefits, disability claims, and pension entitlements, effective immediately." Colin Dorsey, the prosecutor, didn't protest. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he nodded, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Sophia raised her voice one last time. "And one more thing," she said, her words sharp now, clear as glass cutting through stone. "I order everyone in this courtroom to rise, in honor of a soldier, a hero, and a brother in arms." The room rose as one. Even the bailiffs, even the clerk, even the reporters lowering their cameras and phones. And in that moment, as Horace Grant slowly stood, his back straightening, his chin lifting, a flicker of pride returning to the weathered face, the forgotten veteran was forgotten no more. The weight of silence was sacred. No applause, no cheers, just a solemn, unified standing of men and women who saw Horace Grant for who he truly was. Brandon Swan stepped back, a quiet satisfaction in his expression. The gavel struck once. "Court is adjourned," and Horace, blinking against the sting in his eyes, whispered the only words he could manage. "Semper Fi." The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, its amber light washing over the cracked sidewalks and sagging awnings of the East Side Veterans Shelter. A gentle breeze stirred faded flags strung along the chain-link fence, their colors dulled by years of sun and rain. Inside the modest building, the scent of brewed coffee and old wood lingered, mixing with quiet conversation and the clatter of dominoes against worn tables. Horace Grant sat by the window, his broad frame hunched, elbows resting on his knees. A styrofoam cup of coffee steamed untouched at his side. Outside, children's voices echoed from the street, sharp, bright reminders of a world he'd learned to watch from a distance. He'd grown used to these days, the long stretches of time, heavy with memory and silence. But today, something gnawed at him, a restless pulse beneath his skin. And when the front door creaked open, he felt it like a shift in the air. Sophia Woodson stepped inside. Gone was the black robe of the courtroom. In its place, a simple gray coat, a blue scarf tucked against her throat. Her expression was softer now, the sharp lines of authority replaced by something raw and unguarded. In her hands, she clutched a bundle of weathered, yellowed envelopes, tied together with a piece of fraying twine. Horace's brow furrowed. "Judge," he greeted, his voice low, gravelly. "Sophia," she corrected, managing a faint, fragile smile. "Please, just Sophia." He nodded, his eyes dropping to the bundle she carried. "I should have come sooner," she began, moving toward the empty chair across from him. "But I needed time to read these." She set the letters down on the table between them. The paper was brittle, edges curled, some smudged by years of dust and handling. Each envelope bore the same neat, disciplined handwriting. "Woodson, Sophia." postmarked from Iraq, Kuwait, Germany. Names of places neither of them wanted to say aloud. "They're from Harry," she whispered, her voice catching. "From my brother." Horace's fingers trembled as he reached for them, calloused hands brushing against the twine, as if afraid the letters might crumble beneath his touch. "I thought I'd lost them. Or maybe I just couldn't bear to face them after he—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "But after what happened in that courtroom, after what you did for him, for me, I knew you had a right to see them." Horace untied the twine with deliberate care, lifting the top envelope. The paper felt impossibly light in his hands. As he opened it, the words leapt from the page like ghosts. "Sis, you wouldn't believe this man I'm serving under. Sergeant Grant. Big guy, always carrying more than his share. He's the one you want in a foxhole when everything goes to hell." Horace's throat closed. His vision blurred. He kept reading. "Took a hit last night. Thought I was done. But Grizzly, that's what we call him, he dragged me out like I weighed nothing. Bastard even cracked a joke about my ugly mug while bullets were flying. Saved me, Sophia. Not just my body, my spirit. He makes you believe maybe you'll see home again." The letter shook in his grasp. A tear, unbidden and unchecked, slipped down his cheek, cutting a clean line through the grime and whiskers. Sophia reached across the table, her hand covering his. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I read those words 100 times when they first arrived, but I never knew the face. Until now." Horace cleared his throat, his voice raw. "I remember your brother. Smart kid. Couldn't shoot worth a damn, but brave. Wouldn't leave a man behind." Sophia gave a wet, broken laugh. "Sounds like Harry." They sat in the thick hush of the shelter's common room, the quiet punctuated only by the distant sounds of a television murmuring news no one watched. "I made a promise to him once," Sophia said at last, her gaze fixed on the pile of letters, "that I'd make something of myself, that I'd take care of people like you, like him, if I could. I failed that, Horace. I let the system bury men like you. I let myself forget." Horace met her eyes. "We all forget things we shouldn't. The trick is what you do when you remember." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I want to fight for them," she said. "For you. For every soldier lost in the cracks of this country. I can't undo what's been done, but I can start making it right. And I want you with me when I do." Horace's face cracked into something close to a smile. It wasn't wide or easy, but it was real. "I'd like that," he said quietly. The sun slipped lower in the sky, its last rays catching on the edges of the letters, casting them in gold. Outside, the wind stirred the flag one more time, and Horace Grant, once a forgotten soldier, a ghost in a city that no longer saw him, felt, at long last, the weight of his sacrifice ease. Not gone, but lighter. The kind of burden shared between two souls, bound by memory, loss, and hard-won grace. As they stood to leave, Sophia placed the letters back in his hands. "They belong to you now." He held them like something sacred, and together, they stepped out into the dying light of evening. A soldier, a sister, and the promise of a reckoning still to come. From then on, Horace walked again with his head held high. This story reminds us that sometimes, the people society forgets are the ones who once gave everything for it. If you were in Judge Sophia's place, would you have done the same? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories, right here on Embrace the Journey.